Yeah, I don't have a webcam, so it's just a
Yeah,
voice
no
chat.
worries. No worries. That's completely good on my end as well. No problem.
All right, so I'll just start by introducing the conversation. So today I'm interviewing. Is it Kid Shepherd? Is that how you pronounce it?
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
Okay, good. Yeah, this is Kid Shepherd. He runs Talking Psychology on YouTube, which is a channel I interact with a lot. And I decided to bring him on because I realized I was like, wait a second, you work in French, psychotherapy. So there's a lot of value in just like talking directly to an English speaking audience about like what it's just like practically in working and training in French psychotherapy in the modern era.
Yes. Mm. Yes, well, thank you for having me, and it's a real pleasure. And it's true that, how can I say, I'm happy to be here because there's a lot to talk about in regards to French psychiatry. So, would you want me to present myself more?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it'd be great to learn more about like kind of what you do in like a daily practice.
Yes, okay. So basically, outside of YouTube, because that's kind of a bubble in of its own, I basically have three work activities. The first one and my main one is working in an institution which does not have an exact translation in English. So I'm going to try and get the closest idea, is a sheltered workshop. So it's a form of facility that helps people with disabilities. And in France, disabilities is a very wide spectrum that includes schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, Down syndrome, Fragile X syndrome, and so on and so forth. People who have issues and could not work in, let's say, ordinary workplaces. We help them by giving them jobs in the sheltered workshop that aim on the long term to get them rehabilitated to be able to work in an ordinary environment, knowing that it's not possible for everyone, obviously, and that's okay. That we have them from 19 or 18 and up until 62 or 64. So
Okay.
there's a very wide range of people in the workshop. So that's my first activity. My second activity is in a private practice. Basically providing psychotherapy for patients. And basically, I see a bit of everyone. I see English speaking people as much as I see French speaking people. And my third activity is basically working with the families of people who have severe mental illness, such as schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, and sometimes clinical forms of paranoia, and trying to help them navigate basically the relationship with their children most of the time, but that can sometimes be with their siblings.
That's
That's
really
pretty much it.
that's really interesting because it's kind of like every part of what you do is kind of like touching in different parts of like the social sphere of like the impact of mental illness.
Yes. Yes, and that's something that I'm very, how can I say, adamant about, is really working in multiple environments, because I do believe it's a real richness as a psychologist to be able to see a bit of everything and a bit of every social stratus, as I, how can I say, have provided psychotherapy for people who would be considered part of the elite, as much as I have provided psychotherapy for people who are on an unemployment benefit or who cannot work and are on disability benefit.
Yeah. See, like in America, what I experienced, I don't practice. Obviously, I was a programmer, but obviously, I have my own interactions as like a patient. And like one of the things that was really strange was because of some clerical issues with the government, um, I was being billed on Medicaid, which is the state health insurance, for longer than I should have for my therapy, right? And I did not even know that my therapist only sees people with Medicaid, right? And only people who are on like government assistance. And a big problem in the United States, just in general, with like public resources like that, is just like it's almost like there's like a huge gap between what is available there, right, and then what is available in a more private practice, right? Like if you had like private insurance. And like I guess one question I have is like how does like how do you find yourself in a situation where you're working in so many spheres at the same time, like just like almost like career wise, like how does that even happen? That's kind of interesting. Like is that something that happens more often in France?
Yes, well, here I'm only going to speak about clinical psychologists, as that's my area and that's where I
Yeah.
work and that's where I have most of my, how can I say, contacts. And it is very frequent, like exceedingly frequent, for psychologists in France to have multiple professions at once. Like full-time institutional employment is very rare because we are unfortunately quite expensive. Therefore, institutions only employ us, let's say, for 1 to 3 days a week. So it is not very common for us to have full-time employment in institutions. So therefore, we tend to have multiple activities at once.
That's really interesting. I just imagine that it's challenging to deal with, you know, being employed by several places at once. That must be like a clerical nightmare.
Yeah.
Like there's advantages and disadvantages. Obviously, you're able to see like a wider scope of things, like than if you were like, because like again, one thing that I saw a lot. I don't. It's not everywhere, but a lot of the times in the United States is that you'll have a like a practice will usually have like a therapist and their psychiatrists and etc. All and their social work and stuff. They're all kind of like in one space, right? So you do get exposed to like other sides of the practice and other sides of things, but it's always within the context of that one institution.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. And yes, that would be the most, how can I say, I think obvious like way of dealing with things. But it's true that in France, and this is a topic I was going to touch upon, so I'm going to touch upon it right now. And there's been a lot of budget cuts, and therefore, how can I say, whereas we would be more numerous, we are starting in terms, when I say we, I mean the healthcare professions, all included, we are starting to see less and less employment in institutions, and there's a real push to try and liberalize, i.e., get it externalized in the institutions, meaning that we would not be employed by the institution, but we would be working in cooperation with the institutions, which is a detriment to the patient, because when we're in the institutions, we see our colleagues, we work directly with them, whereas if we're just in an external practice, we don't have that richness of professions.
Kind of like a contract, like a contractor.
Yes, yes, but without, how can I say, any guarantees. Well, there might be no guarantees in America for contractors. I don't know the state of it, but it would really be just like, how can I say, going to a private doctor. Like you send the patient to the private doctor, but you don't have any feedback on what is happening.
Oh, okay, so it's more disjointed.
Yes, yes, and it wasn't always like that, and that I also wanted to talk about this because the problem is that right now in France we're in kind of a middle road of what is happening, because basically we used to be very heavily institutionalized, because France, for example, contrary to, for example, England, where there was a push to de-institutionalize, for example, mental hospitals, to try and like dismantle them. In France, we had the contrary vision of we have to maintain an institution but make them better, make them able to accompany people, but not over a couple of weeks, but really matters of years, and to really be able to take the time. And unfortunately, right now, we are at basically at the point where the government is pushing for us to reduce that care, to make it as quick as possible. And there's been a lot of incentive to really, how can I say, push us to make it quick and to reduce the level of healthcare provided.
Where does this pressure come from, like, in your opinion?
Yes, so in my opinion, it comes from basically the government institutions, notably l'ARS. So in French, it's l'Agence Régionale de Santé, so the healthcare agency in France, which basically provides funding for institutions. And what we've seen in the last few years is that the jobs of, for example, psychiatrists and psychologists haven't been renewed. So when someone retires or leaves the job, renewal is not automatic, meaning that some funding has been cut, and therefore institutions are, how can I say, not as funded as they used to be. But there's also an ideological underpinning to this, because beforehand we used to be in a more collectivist system where it was understood that institutions could help and could really fundamentally change the lives of people. But now it's not what the government is trying to aim towards. It's trying to aim towards budget cuts and trying to, let's say, save as much money as possible, which is a complete nonsense clinically. But it's something that is being pushed by the government. Therefore, we are seeing the institutions being defunded and what is called des centres experts, meaning expert centers where you get diagnosed but you don't get treatment, flourish. With this idea that once we treat the medical side of things, everything's going to be okay.
That's a bit dire.
Yes, unfortunately, how can I say? I have to say that even though we are, and I am part of it, an institutional psychotherapy movement, it's been harder and harder these last few years to really push in that direction. And I don't want to, how can I say, seem gloomy about this, but it's, how can I say, the government clearly wants to push it in the direction of an ultra-liberal system in which it's more about private practice than institutional practice.
That's something that kind of like, you know, so like when I was really psychotic back in 2021, I was like conscious and aware enough to really understand that like a big part of my like frustration and fear of, you know, getting like more intervention than just, I was going to therapy at the time, which, you know, God bless my therapist having to listen to all that crazy bullshit I was spouting every week. I know they're used to it, but Christ. But like, you know, just like, it was so hard because it was just like, I really just needed a space where I could live and not be like in danger of being homeless or any crazy shit like that, and just be able to kind of like figure out how to make things work, figure out how to you know, just kind of get my bearings on life. Maybe I would need medication, maybe I wouldn't, whatever, but like just a safe place to live where I'm not under pressure from like all the things around me. And like it's kind of hard, I think, to like, I think like a lot of the fear in the US of like an organized kind of institution, right, is that they see it as kind of like a prison, right, which is, you know, historically how things have looked in the US. And it's, and you know, there's a lot of issues, honestly, internationally with you know, patient rates and stuff, but like I believe that there is a real middle ground. But yeah, basically what I'm saying is that it's almost like there's not really like a safe place for people to recover from illnesses, and it's kind of like, it's like yeah, that's kind of like the problem with the privatization of these institutions, and the kind of like the transformation into just like almost everything just being like an outpatient service. Because this was a problem that I like, usually the problem that people encounter in the US going inpatient is that they're suicidal and they don't understand the system, and they get abused by, you know, staff in a mental institution who, you know, harass them and keep them much longer than they really need to be. And it's kind of crazy that they pull that shit with, to people who are suicidal and really just need a couple days to pull themselves back together, or even maybe just a night. But with somebody like me who was actively psychotic and wasn't even given meds the second time until 48 hours in, like, I was literally telling them, I'm like, I need my meds. And and they were just like, well, we can't prescribe you any meds until like Monday, I think it was. I'm like, what the fuck? I didn't choose to come here on a Friday. What the hell? So and they released me 6 days after I was admitted. And it's like, what? And then they give me a 30-day supply. And the first time, they just expect you to find somebody within 30 days, which is already hard enough because, just as you're talking about shortages are really bad here, too. And it's gotten worse since that happened. That was back in 2021. That was 5 years ago. But, yeah, and it's just like... Sorry, I keep having memory loss. But yeah, it's just like... It's crazy that I was just basically thrown back into the world and expected to pull my shit together, and it's completely ineffective for everyone. It doesn't matter if you're if you're like schizophrenic, or if you're bipolar or something really serious, or if it's even just something like, you have waves of really bad depression sometimes, and and it's just like, it's crazy.
Yes, no, absolutely, and I couldn't agree more with your perspective that it is bad treatment. I mean, literally, to send someone out into the wild to fend for themselves when they're in such states. And I think that is where institutional psychotherapy is so important, because the idea, as you pointed out, the idea is not to have prisons, but for psychotic people, for depressed people, for bipolar people. The point is to try and help them. And I do think, and this is where I think institutional psychotherapy really shines, is this idea that institutions can be helpful, can heal and mend mental illness, but it needs also time and space. And it's true that because I watched your videos about your experience, it is appalling what happens in America, and with your experience also, that patients are just left to defend themselves against the outside world when they're in no state for that.
So one thing I wanted to point out too was, I remember one of the days right before I was admitted, I just remember thinking I wish I could just go over there and just do shit, because it's oh my god, see, at the time all I knew about Laborde was what I was reading either from Guattari's accounts or from I think it was Intersecting Lives, that's what it's called, by Francois Doss. And that's it's a biography of Deleuze and Guattari. In my opinion, I think it's kind of, how do I say it? It's kind of, he's overly flowery and positive about, I don't think he's portrays psychiatric care in a realistic lens. So, at the time, I feel I had kind of a naive view. But at the same time, it was still, they have, 100 activities or some crazy shit. They had horse riding. I've seen the video of the horses. It's crazy when you tell Americans, you're in France, they had a mental institution where you could go horse riding, right? And, when I was in the institution, they have nothing there, obviously, because everything's super unfunded, and they've got a few books, they got a TV, and it's so boring. Oh my god, you can't do anything.
Yes, and that's something that is, how can I say, it is something that is a shame that it has gone that way for America in terms of mental health care, because in France there used to be, right now it's changing, but there used to be a lot of activities, and those things were really considered to really help. patients, and they were not seen as like occupational. They were really seen as something transformative. That it was something that binded people together, and that sometimes, for example, animals like horses, but also I've seen, for example, work with dogs can be so very important for patients
Yes.
and their development.
It's kind of interesting that you bring up dogs because dogs are often used with like disabled children, and it makes me wonder like how it makes me wonder how like outside of maybe like guide dog purposes, but like actual kind of like affection between yourself and an animal and having that animal have a relation in your life and stuff, how that actually like plays a lot into therapy. Because I noticed so a lot of blind people who have guide dogs, it's more than just the fact that the dog guides them. Obviously, they have a very close relation to their dogs, and that in of itself is a big part, I think, of like, and I obviously I can't speak for them, but like I think it's a very big part of like what is valuable to them, like as having the dog in the first place. Like it's not just about the dog's ability to lead, but the dog and the relationship between the dog and the human forms something that is kind of like difficult to describe, almost like I would describe it almost like an existential relation, where it's like I have a meaningful relationship with this dog that gives meaning in my life, right? people find
Yes.
people find often like value in like taking care of an animal, right, and keeping an animal in good health and keeping an animal happy and things like that, especially somebody who's disabled and may not have access to like just everyday life.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And I really do agree with that, especially because animals are often so loving that they create inherently a good relationship with the individual that takes care of them. And I think that's very, very valuable because for some patients, here I'm thinking about my clinical experience, but for example, people with severe catatonia or forms of autism where communication can be impeded, the animal is so very important to try and create a link, a bond that then basically can grow to such an extent that they reconnect with humans afterwards. So I completely agree with your perspective.
In my experience, I find that dogs can be very helpful because they don't talk, but they can still like express like concern. So this guy's a puppy; he still doesn't know things. But I used to live with a dog who was more on the elder side. She was like 9 years old, right? And she was very helpful to me. Like whenever I would have like minor episodes in the kitchen and things like that, because you know, I can't really, like, when those things would happen, I can't really, like, put myself together. I'm scared because my body is not working the way that I expect it to. My brain isn't working the way I expect it to. People can be very frightening like that because they can go up in your face, they can talk, they can move in ways that are really frightening and unpredictable. And a dog that you're familiar with is like, not only are they going to react in a way that you understand and they're not going to like freak out or anything, but they also show concern in a way that's not overwhelming. It was very helpful for me to have that dog, and a lot of times, like, when I was able to come down and pet her, that was often enough to help me recover enough to just come back to normal. And like that was really important, just to have something that wasn't talking all the time. Like it's kind of funny actually that I run a channel about Guattari and I'm talking about this, but it's like, why do people think that just talking to somebody is all you need? Like a lot of it has to do, like a lot of that can be really overwhelming, especially like you said, for autistic or catatonic people.
Yes, yes, and that's very true. I think that the presence of the animal, or sometimes even the human, but the quiet presence, right? Not the presence where you talk or just when you're there, that inherently has a lot of therapeutic value. And I think that I agree with you on this question of people often seem to believe that you can do a pep talk to someone in a severe condition and that everything's going to be fine. But sometimes it's counterproductive, whereas the relationship, the presence without the talk is sometimes what is needed.
Yeah, something I see a lot actually with people who come into my server who ask like, "Hey, I know somebody who is in my family who's, schizophrenic or sometimes has a psychotic episode," and they may ask me like, "Well, what do I do about their delusions? What do I do about their hallucinations? Do I like tell them no, it's not happening? Do I tell?" And I'm like, what they really want is to know something stable, right? They want to know that they can trust you and know that you are going to make sure that they're safe. That more than anything is more valuable than anything else. Like a lot of times when I'm having like really serious issues and like what I notice is that people stop making sense before I stop making sense, right? So like people will just sound like they're making gibberish and I'm like, I'm out of here, right? And like when that's happening, you can't just go and walk up to me and say like, "Oh, I need you to do this or that or the other," because you're not making any sense. All right? And like I need to know that I can trust you to know I can just say, "Hey, I'm, having issues right now. Let's talk later," right? And that was something that's kind of funny because that was a lot of contrast with what I had to deal with in my previous living situation. The person I was living with didn't really understand that very well, right? And she just keep talking and talking, and it's so stressful because it's like it's just more stimulus. It's more stimulus, and you're just like, oh my god, where's the stop button? Where's the stop button? And but I've established this trusting relationship with my girlfriend, and it's helped so much because like I know that like if I do have a problem, then I can take care of it. I can and I can reach a state of homeostasis where I can actually manage things. Like one of the things that's really frustrating right now is that it's really hard for me to find work that's actually compatible with my life because like I destabilize really quickly or I have other health issues that interfere with my ability to work. And right now I'm trying to figure out things I can do behind a computer that fit into my lifestyle, but it's really tough. And it's just like it's just like that's how I have to live, that's how I have to manage. But yeah, definitely one thing I need to make sure that I ask because that's the question everybody wants to know more about. So you talk about institutional psychotherapy. You should tell us all about your experiences with institutional psychotherapy. Maybe you did say that in our interview, or not in our interview, our email conversation, that you're not like an expert or anything, but just having like a institutional experience firsthand and seeing things up front, that's incredibly valuable. We want to hear all about it.
Okay. So I'll do my best. So basically, what I would like to tell people is that my experience comes in basically two ways. So the first is theoretical, as in my training, just as a psychologist, I was, how can I say, there were courses on institutional psychotherapy. So we basically sensibilized to the question of the institutional psychotherapy from the start of our work, because at least when I was training, there was this understanding that we have to work in institutions, that private practice is only a secondary goal, that maybe one day we will have one, but that's not the main point. The point is the institution. And on top of that, I also have a degree in institutional psychotherapy, like an independent degree from my basic training. So my understanding of it is both concrete, because I try and apply it in my day-to-day work in the institution, even though, and I want to make this very clear, my institution isn't an institution that carries institutional psychotherapy among its principles. I try and basically open up to these principles. So basically, I have a dual mindset about that.
Yeah.
So before I go on,
go on.
please.
I was just gonna say that's pretty common
Yes. Yes, pretty common. You mean in the sense of trying to of the institution not being involved in institutional
I
psychotherapy, or
mean, like,
common in?
it's very common
Mhm.
for like individual, practitioners to try to integrate their own kind of like values and like which perspectives they find valuable in their own practice alongside like there's like a challenge of integrating like your own practices into the larger institutions that you're functioning within.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And it's true that because there is a work element to my institution, like the patients can work at their pace, but they have to work. That's, how can I say, mandatory in our institution. Again, that doesn't mean they have like objectives of, I don't know, you have to iron 5 shirts, or if not, you're sacked. Absolutely not. But they still have to try and iron the shirts, right? For example. But what I try to bring in the institution is this understanding, because I think that one of the core elements of institutional psychotherapy is the understanding that the institution is something that needs to be helped in of itself. That we are not just individuals in a group. We are all part of the institution, a bit like organs are part of a body. And I think that what I try at least to bring to my colleagues is this understanding that we're all valuable, from basically the janitor up to the head of the department, that we all have basically our role to be playing, but also the patients, and that we are all together in this. That is not, we are the staff that provides treatment. We are part of the whole process of the group, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, no, I understand completely. It's kind of funny that you bring up janitor because I was a janitor at one point for an elementary school for a short period, and it was very interesting because I had never stepped in a school outside of dropping my stepson into his like middle school a few times, um, but not like actually like cleaning up classrooms and stuff and seeing what like is like taught and stuff, and it's a completely different perspective than anything I've ever imagined, right? And there were things that I saw from that perspective that I would never see anywhere else, right? And that's where so much of that value comes from. It's not just of it's like it's easy to like reduce like people within an institution down to maybe their function, right? And this is kind of like one of the big problems, especially within like labor institutions in general. I think because you have like the boss that's telling the laborers what to do, and there's so many cases, especially like within the history of like workplace safety and stuff, where like the perspectives and the knowledge and the basically the inner world of excuse me, hey, chill Pebbles, chill, basically the inner world of the workers, right,
Mm-hmm.
just is not respected and valued. And this actually does lead to a lot of industrial accidents and stuff where like things break and things because they don't pay attention to what people see on the ground. and
Yes.
and it's just like that's kind of like one of the things that I always thought was really drew me into like institutional psychotherapy in general. Like not just like to be clear, Guattari's like thing is different. It kind of spawned from it, but it's definitely different. He's out there. He's out there. I don't blame you for being like, I'm still trying to figure out what he's saying. Everybody is. Don't worry. That's the plan. It's unfolding. It's becoming.
Yes.
But institutional psychotherapy itself was like super fascinating to me because it was like I think a good way to just compare it, right, is it's kind of like a well, it's like a machine where it's like there are different layers of things interacting with each other. Like you have, instead of this hierarchy of of like roles that are distributed through like the administration down to the management down to the yeah instead of that, right, there's all of these like interacting, you know, nodes essentially that are like composing the entire fabric of the institution. And obviously in most practices I would assume that you don't really have the freedom to be able to do something totally crazy radical with that, but just being aware and recognizing that, you know, I think improves the the quality of life and practice for everybody involved.
I completely agree, and it's true that you if you're even if you're in an institution and practice an institutional psychotherapy, you never get away with what Guattari used to do. That's,
I would hope so.
yes, that I think that really led you into massive trouble.
He was like, "All right, let Jesus take the wheel."
Yeah, but I think actually that's a that's a funny thing, because I think Guattari is really representative of a very wild aspect of French psychiatry, where, like, there used to be a time, from my understanding, from what my teachers have told me, where basically everything flew, like, as long as you don't kill the patient. I mean, that everything, like, you could try, like, I mean, that was a, how can I say, it's long since gone, right? But there used to be that wild time in psychiatric institutions, but that's pretty much over. But he's a very good representative of that time, and just for that, it's wonderful to read him. And because I wanted to go back to the aspect of, yes, everyone in the institution is valuable, because, see, and for example, you as a janitor, you would have seen things, heard things, or even people would have talked to you in a specific way. And the information you would have gathered, and this is, I think, where institutional psychotherapy is brilliant, is that it's the idea that every cog in the machine is important, and that everyone can participate. And I found that to be incredibly wonderful, that everyone is valuable, from the janitor to the patient to the psychologist to the psychiatrist, and we all have a role together that is non-hierarchical, because what you can bring to the table is your perspective, and that's as valuable as everyone else's, regardless of training or status, quote unquote.
I have one question that comes to mind just spontaneously thinking about it, right? So, like, in, like, software development and, like, product development and stuff, you have, you know, focus testing and QA, and there is a hierarchy that evolves from essentially this feedback system, right? So, like, the hierarchy is like, oh, I'm a game developer, and I'm making my game my vision, right? And you provide me feedback so that I decide, yes, I will implement that. No, I will not implement that, to try to make a product that I think will sell really well. So, like, obviously there's this obvious hierarchy between, you know, the feedback that is offered by these, like, focus testers and the developer themselves. And I'm curious about how in practice, like, how does institutional psychotherapy avoid that kind of hierarchy?
Yes, so so this theory and practice. In theory, normally there is a real push to try and undo hierarchy, like, at least on a theoretical level. However, in practice, medical doctors tend to still lead the way. Like, I mean, they are often, and management is the same, there's often a real reluctance to let go of their power in terms of decisional and organizational, let's say, agency. So I would say that the aim is to try and make it as flat as possible in terms of hierarchy, but the reality is that people still want their power. And when I say this, I mean everyone at their level, like psychologists who want to keep their power, like educators or staff members will want to keep their power, and even patients between themselves sometimes want to keep their hierarchy of "I've been here longer than you, therefore I know how it goes."
Mm-hmm.
So it's every level that has to kind of renounce their power, individual and collective.
Something that's actually, I think, not discussed enough in like just Anglo anti-psychiatry or psychiatry critical or whatever discourses, is something that I am very like critically vocal about, is that it doesn't talk enough about the power relations between patients, right? So like when I was inpatient the last time, I was obviously like really unaware of what was going on around me because I'd only been medicated for 4 days while I was there. And I found out later that there was a lot of weird, like, sexual assault things going on around me.
Yeah.
And I know that there were people who were trying to pick fights with me when I was there, because there was, like, these power relations that people were, like, there were some people who were definitely trying to stir shit. I'm sure you've and are trying to, like, you know, vie for power within the patient. And the thing is that, like, we're restricted to this tiny little block of patient rooms and one, like, recreation room, and it's like a L-shaped block, and I'm like already going mad trying to pacing down this freaking L back and forth, and now there's this person who's picking fights with me, and apparently there's also all this weird sexual stuff that's happening around me, and I find out about half of it after I leave, you know. And it's just like, it's like there's so much going on there, and I feel like it's almost really hard to even, like, organize that kind of level of, like to discuss that level of, like, issues with hierarchy without having, like, a very, like maybe La Board was able to get away with it, but, like, I feel like a modern institution would really struggle with that.
Yes. Well, it's very counterintuitive in the sense that, and Cooper, for example, talks about this, that, for example, there is this idea that management, but at the time psychiatrists were at the top, and that basically they were the representative of authority, or, you know, like what Deleuze and Guattari talk about in the Anti-Oedipus, that it's daddy the psychiatrist, right? Daddy of the institution. Therefore, he gets to choose, he gets to say, and if he announces that power, then it becomes complicated because people might feel lost. So how Le Board organized it, from my understanding of it, is that Uri still kept power, but he was more willing to listen to other perspectives, other theories, and he was more welcoming of different opinions. And I think that this is kind of the key, because I think if, for example, no one is in charge, it might create a lot of anxiety, and people need someone to take responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
It might seem stupid, but it's very rare for people to be able to, without anxiety, say, well, it's okay, no one is responsible and we're all responsible. Often people want someone to choose so that they can delegate their sense of responsibility, which is, I think, the major issue, is that people want someone to blame if things go bad.
And like, as people,
you know,
people
can...
sorry for interrupting, but, like, I think it's, like, really that people need, like, some level of structure, like, and I struggle with this a lot myself, right? Like, after I recovered from, like, my major psychotic episode, like, one of the most difficult things outside of, like, my memory issues to deal with is just organizing my day. Like, just getting myself, like, I have to write stuff down these days, and I have to and it's just trying to remember to write things down, and trying to use my phone is really hard. And I think a lot of people get mistaken that, like, structure is bad, structure is this, structure is that. Now, in 1,000 Plateaus, there's that quote from the faciality plateau where Deleuze and Guattari say to not deterritorialize the face too quickly or it might lead to madness, right? And this is related to that, right? Where it's like, people already know how things kind of work and how the flows are going. If you lift all of that up instantly, people are going to be like, "Oh my god, what do I do?" Right? Especially if they're coming in like imagine if you're just like some like middle like upper class person having some kind of breakdown, and you go to this hospital and you find out that they don't have any rules. That would be terrifying, because you're thinking to yourself, oh my god, what is this guy gonna stab me in the middle of the night or something like that,
Yeah.
But like that's and it's interesting that you bring up like how Ray allowed all these different ideas to kind of flow around him, like, because first off, there's no fucking way anyone else would have tolerated Guattari's bullshit. Let's get real. Like, most people would have been like, you tried to send patients to the fucking protests in Paris in 1968. Are you fucking insane? Like, whoop, there goes your license.
Yes.
But the fact that he gave him a chance after that. And the thing is, I joke to people, right? Like, obviously that was a horrible decision. That was a horrible idea. He should have never done that, right? But I like to tell people that his heart was in the right place, because he was because with the right schizo, which you're probably not going to find in an institution with like 120, 30 patients, right? But with the right schizo out of a big enough pool of people, yes, maybe, but not with the people that you're responsible for.
No, it's absolutely. There's no way that would fly. And nowadays, I even think he would be prosecuted.
Well, yeah. They'd be like, "Excuse me, what?" That's like such a violation of medical ethics.
Oh yeah, no way that would fly. But there's absolutely other things that, how can I say, even without taking it that far, it's true that there's you're right about this question of basically organizations and the fact of needing structure, because an institution, and this is also what I find, is that they cannot survive without structure. But I think that institutions like psychotherapy bring structure through this understanding that we're all in this together, and that we all can think together. Because I think one of the issues of, let's say, modern psychiatry and psychology is that there's this idea that some perspectives are more valuable than others, which I find very distasteful, because I think that everyone, including patients, can bring very good points and very important points to the setting. That this is not a top-down situation, and even if someone is psychotic and in a psychotic episode, that doesn't take away their lived experience and the criticism that might arise as they are experiencing the institution.
Yeah, definitely. There's always like it really doesn't matter at the end of the day if they're psychotic. It matters what they're saying and what they're doing and what they're contributing towards the larger picture. And a person who's psychotic, that may or may not be something that you can work with at a given time. But really, how I see it is that if you can work with it, go for it. That's an opportunity to improve everybody's life. And it's interesting because a lot of what you're talking about also kind of draws into more like collective living, right? Because like even when you're not just trying to like organize within like a like an institutional setting, right? But like, let's say like something that would be kind of more like, I don't know, like a farmer co-op or something where everybody's living together or something. To organize that in a more like fair and justified way, like it would really be based in just the fact that everybody's working towards something that matters to everybody, right? Like I think like part of what really is difficult about modernity in general, like from a psychological point of view, is that it feels that like there is no like glue to existence, especially without like at least a little bit of collectivity in your life. Like people are extremely lonely, right? In America, everybody's talking about the loneliness epidemic, right? And that's because it really is the alienation epidemic, because really what's happening is that we're so alienated from each other that we're not experiencing like the value from like a collective, you know, existential value from each other. We see each other as like an inconvenience. Oh, you're making too much noise, you're being annoying. And like it's really hard being like, you know, it's really hard being a psychotic person, because like you don't know if you're being annoying or a problem at a given time until people are just dicks to you and push you away. And that's one of the most alienating things ever, because you can't even fix the problem.
Yes, absolutely. And I feel that to further your point, we are in a society, at least at present, that is hyper-individualistic, meaning it's always about the individual at every level, right? The exemplary, let's say, patient, the perfect practitioner, and so on and so forth. But the collective is more and more indeed cut up to reduce us to individuals. But again, and I agree with you, we're not that. We are also supposed to live and function collectively. And regarding psychosis, I think that another big point is that a lot of people, unfortunately, are still very afraid of psychosis, believing it to be something that can directly impact them, be it by myths such as the psychotic person is inherently violent, ruthless, and so on and so forth. And there's also, I think, unconscious elements to this, of a fear of contagion, that quote-unquote madness can go from one person to another. And I think that people don't realize those unconscious fears.
Yeah, I definitely think that's true as well. I think that, like, I think a lot of it... So, like, I think a really interesting example, too, is that... And this also connects to, like developmental disabilities, like autism and stuff like that. Is just like the relationship that it has with the concept of rationality and rationalism and thinking rationally. I was looking over one of my former essays from a few months ago, and I brought up the quote from Richard Dawkins, where he infamously states that religion is something so insane that only a mad person could come up with it. And it's like, when you say that, you're not just saying that religion is crazy. You're also saying that a crazy person's word is unreliable. And a lot of my anxiety, up to the point that I went psychotic, right, was me basically being afraid of going crazy, because then my words would not mean anything anymore. It was almost like once you go crazy, you're incapable of rationality again, and you're thus this completely alienated person, right? And you can imagine that just makes everything 10 times worse when you experience that. And it's like, it's very heavily integrated into our society that we should be, quote unquote, thinking rationally. But like, there's a lot of what passes by, like what is rational and what is not, and sometimes it can be very contextual. Like one of the ones I give a good example of is, there, you may have heard of this. There was an infamous startup from the 2000s, 2010s called Theranos. It was the one where the woman was testing the blood samples, and it was all fake. She faked it all. And one of the things that's very interesting about it is that in the early periods of this startup, she's spending like 3 nights no sleep just working on this grandiose idea. It's like, if you did not have $40 million from an investor, you'd be in a hospital for doing that. You would be in a hospital. You would be diagnosed with bipolar. And it's all about, and you realize at some point it's all about context, because I'm not with medicine, but with game development, but I've been in that situation where basically slept like 3 hours across 3 days, just working straight on something like, I got this, and it's like, I was crazy. You know? And that's the thing, it's like a lot of it, like, so like one of the things that I really try to capture in like my critique and the practice of just psychiatry in general and psychology is like the problem is not necessarily like the idea that people can suffer from a malady, or that people can, you know, that psychosis is just like a trip or something. Like, there's more to it than that, for sure, right? And I want to preserve that aspect of it because, you know, going psychotic was one of the most terrifying experiences of my life. Would not recommend. And, you know, we need a way to be able to acknowledge that aspect of it, but at the same time, without producing all of these, like, crazy extra structures that just can make everything worse by perpetually alienating people through that context, through not just the assumptions of violence, but also the assumptions of irrationality. And I think that kind of also boils down to, now that I say it, like, unpredictability. That's really what it's about. Like, oh my god, they could be violent, they could be unstable, that kind of thing.
Yes, and you're absolutely right, and I completely share your perspective, because there's so many things that are done in this world because of, how can I say, certain exceptions. Like, for example, I don't know, your example was very, very good and very telling, that yes, someone that is a billionaire and that acts, how can I say, psychotically, will just be seen as a maverick, whereas you or I, we do that, and that's directly to the hospital. And there is this aspect also that once someone is labeled, it's like a free pass to discredit them, to disavow their talk and their speech as just being psychotic, when in fact, in my experience, schizophrenic people and people with psychosis in general sometimes point out the truth, where everyone's afraid of doing that. Like, real fundamental good critique is often made by psychotics that have the ability to perceive something that we all tend to see but like deny. They say it up front, and I think that's very valuable and something we very rarely talk about, because we often just see them, as you're saying, as irrational, when in fact sometimes they're the most rational people there is.
Yeah, depending on the situation, really. Yeah. And a lot of it, I think, is just like, you know, it's really just, in my experience, a lot of it is just like the signs are rearranged differently. Like, it's very hard to explain to people what I experience, because when I say, like, oh, I experience angels or voices or whatever, it's easy to perceive something in a very, like, fanciful, like, almost like a video game context, where it's like magical creatures and stuff. No. For me, it's very, like, you know, it's something that I analyze very closely, right, and treat more kind of like a series of codes, right, and understanding, like, when I see something strange in those codes, it's like, okay, something's wrong, right? That's how it works for me, right? I can't speak for everybody, obviously, but that's a big part of how I manage my, you know, my issues. I've adapted and become, you know, familiar with, like, my body and stuff, and it's frustrating because it's like a whole layer of that is just figuring out how to explain to people what I'm feeling, because, like, what I'll be feeling is like, oh, I'm feeling some kind of like intense divine experience, but it's like, if you try to tell somebody that, they're like, to the hospital, and it's like, I don't need to go to the hospital, I just need to lay down for 5 minutes. And, like, I think, like, this is what I remembered I wanted to say. The thing that's so frustrating about this is that, like, when you get diagnosed with a psychotic disorder, whether it be bipolar or schizophrenia or whatever, a lot of doctors will just not take seriously symptoms that you report, right? Like, for me, like, so I'm glad that at least the hearing issues that I was investigating were investigated, because it's like, weird because have been experiencing what felt like hearing loss. I couldn't understand people when they were talking to me. Like, just, it felt like I was losing my hearing. And I got tested just now, like this week, and it turns out my hearing's really good, and I'm realizing, oh shit, that's my brain. that's my post-psychosis brain. Holy shit, oh my god. But like, at least I was able to figure that out, right? But like, one of the things that's really frustrating is that back when I was in Michigan, a lot of the problems that I had were not seriously investigated because it was like, oh, well, you know, you're just experiencing things. You're just experiencing things. It's like, I don't know if what I'm experiencing is necessarily a seizure or not. I think it would be valuable for me to see if that's a seizure or not, you know, and like, at least like, it basically got to a point where I had to like not mention it sometimes, like just not, like it could be on my chart, maybe it's in the back of their head because they saw it on my chart, but it's not gonna be something I'm gonna say out loud, you know, because it's just like, you're not gonna address the problem, and that's like a very serious concern. Like, that's something that interferes with people's life expectancy potentially, you know, depending on what the issue is, you know. Something that, and this is also a problem with like difficult to diagnose physical conditions and things like that, because it's just like, it's almost like as if like, oh, if I can't find an explanation for it, if it's an idiopathic symptom, right, then it's just whatever, right? It's just whatever, what, you know, when there could be more to it, and it's just, it's frustrating to not be taken seriously.
Yes, absolutely, and I do completely concur with you that the patient is often dismissed because of the mental illness, and unfortunately, there's a lot of lazy people in healthcare that will not do what needs to be done to exclude those hypotheses, and just will label it as a mental issue.
I think there's,
and
I think
although it's...
Oh, sorry to cut you off. I just wanted to say that I think
no.
there's like a real similarity between like how like psychotic people are treated and like how people with like weight issues are treated by physicians, because there's like a lot of stereotypes, especially if they're outside of the field. They are like, if they're like a general doctor, or if they're like, you know, a cardiologist or something, they're not gonna understand, you know, psychosis much better than the average person, you know, and so they're gonna carry a lot of those stereotypes over.
Yes, absolutely, and that's indeed very unfortunate, because what you're saying is true of the overweight person, but it's true, I think, for a lot of conditions. Like, I've met people who, let's say, do not have issues with reality testing, and yet the doctors, for example, if they're depressed, will just say, well, no, this is just because you're depressed, or this is just because you're anxious. It's nothing to do with the medical. And often when, for example, I ask the patients to still go to see the doctor and tell them to still do the blood tests. Yes, there is something. There is a deficiency, for example, or there is a medical issue. But it's very easy for people, and medical doctors included, to dismiss patients based on what is perceived as psychological issues.
Yes.
And it is a real problem, because, as you rightly pointed out, even though they know on paper what, for example, schizophrenia is, they still are, I can say, embedded within the cultural representation of what it is, i.e. someone that has completely lost touch with reality, which, as we both know, is not always the case. And a person who has these symptoms it doesn't mean that they cannot reach a contact with reality.
I think one of the most shocking things, like, honestly, like, after recovering from psychosis, as you know, I wasn't diagnosed schizophrenic. I was diagnosed bipolar, which I think is incorrect. But basically, I like reached out to like people, obviously trying to find other people who had experienced what I experienced, because like I was psychotic for like 2 years. It like just took a whole chunk out of my life. And like when you recover from that and you are able to kind of like pull your senses together again enough to be able to have a job and, you know, function, you're just kind of like, how do I cope with that mentally? Like, how do I deal with that mentally? And so I would try to reach out and find other people who were like me. And at first, I would reach out to bipolar people, and I realized very quickly I don't relate to these people. Like, I relate to the mania and the depression cycles, but they do not understand what I'm experiencing with the psychosis shit. So I started to talk more to people diagnosed with schizophrenia, and what's really shocked me is that they experienced in many cases less significant symptoms than I did. Like, many of them don't even suffer from visual hallucinations, which is something that I have to deal with almost on a daily basis. And it was just kind of jarring to me, because it was like, again, all of those people are diagnosed schizophrenic, and people just assume, like, they are just not in contact with reality, when in reality, like, I probably have a more, tenuous grasp with reality than they do. And it's just like mind-boggling that, like, there's still many people who just think, like, we don't have thoughts, or like when I was, even when my most psychotic, right, like, I still was able to experience things. The thing is, I didn't have was very good memory, very good understanding of, like, how things were connected together, so everything felt very disjointed. But, like, I was still aware of things happening to me. Like, if you were cruel to me or you hurt me, I'd still feel it. And it's crazy that there's a lot of people who don't believe that. And there's a lot of cruelty online, too. Like, back when I was crazy, people would just send me random numbers, and I didn't understand it. Like, it didn't impact me when they did that. But somebody pulled me aside and said, yeah, trolls do that to schizophrenics to try to trigger them and make them have episodes. I'm like, what the fuck?
Yes, that's it's the first time I've heard about this, but this is incredibly cruel. I mean, it just baffles me. I mean, that's just an evil action, because the person with schizophrenia needs help, but they need support, and I do believe that relationship is a fundamental baseline of, how can I say, rehabilitation, not in terms of social rehabilitation per se, but just finding mental stability.
Yeah.
And
just being able to,
that someone,
yeah, like, being able to have a stability, like, even just having the stability in your life to know that, like, when you interact with something, it's not gonna just, cause problems. Like, I mean, so I'm sure, have you ever heard of Terry Davis, the Temple OS guy?
yes,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think he was, if I remember this correctly, he was a person diagnosed with schizophrenia, and he created his own OS, and there was some religious aspect to it, if I remember this correctly.
It was meant as, like, a temple to God, basically, right? And he ended up killing himself because of generally most people agree, because of the cyberbullying that he received. And, like, one of the most frustrating things is that, so this is a really infamous video because he has a tendency to throw the N-word around a lot because he's schizophrenic. But there's this video where he is talking about something called the hardest programming in the hardest question in programming. People who have seen this know exactly what I'm talking about. But in the video, he's showing some of his code, right? And one of the top comments when I saw this video last was talking about how, like, mysterious and strange his code was and how weird it was. And somebody replied, it's like, he's just testing his code. It's obviously just him testing switch statements. Like, this is something that, he's writing a programming language. He's testing how it works. That's why it doesn't make any sense, because it's not. It's just like how we were testing the audio at the beginning of the call. It's as if they were. It's as if they listened to that and they said, "Wow, that's very interesting, kid. I never thought about it that way." And it's like, "What are you?" And it's like, people get that detached when they find out that somebody's schizophrenic. And one of the I don't know if you've ever read this one, but I just want to share the basic summary of this. It's in one of my old essays that I wrote, actually, when I was schizophrenic, where I'm talking about why, like, Temple OS is a temple, right? And like I point out that user interfaces, like just the user interface I'm using for this computer, for example, all user interfaces are temples. They're designed to make us feel a certain way and interact in a certain ritualistic, repetitive manner, right? But what kind of God are we worshiping when we're working behind a computer versus, what Terry Davis was trying to make? And when you think about it that way, it actually makes total sense what Terry Davis was trying to do. Terry Davis was trying to make a platform that instead of you embodying this world of going to work all the time, you go to this world where you interact with scripture and God in this particular format. And yes, parts of it are very schizophrenic, like the specifications and all of that. I mean, I get it. I know how that is. But like the concept itself is actually genius. And it's frustrating because this man died like 8-9 years ago, and people still do not understand or appreciate that, right? And I have to pull that out of my archives, and people just are like, "Well, I never thought about it that way." Well, yeah, you never thought about it that way because you were too busy mysticizing somebody who was suffering.
Yes, and you're right to point it out that there is often, and unfortunately, a real push to dehumanize the person suffering from psychosis. That somehow, and this is really where it gets horrible, is that we can not just communicate, but we can understand each other. And there is this idea that just by default, because they're psychotic, it's beyond understanding. And I think that that's very hurtful, both for the schizophrenic, but for us also as a society and basically as a civilization, because of the richness of psychosis, because it's also something that adds to the perception and to the conceptions of the world. A lot of things can be understood also through psychosis. I mean, that doesn't take away the pain and the suffering that people feel, of course not, but they still have a very interesting perception of sins, an understanding of sins.
And I would argue...
And it is lost.
I would argue a large part of that is from their own, minor experiences that they have in their lives that are unique to them, that they may not even have an explanation for. Maybe that's part of, what really kind of started this issue in the first place. Something that I see a lot with people who are paranoid schizophrenics is that oftentimes they were working on projects that are very secretive for one reason or another, right? And this causes, and when they see this or that part of the project and they see a bigger part of it, it's they don't know how to pull it together in their own heads, and things unravel and things like that. And it's not the only factor, obviously, but it's a common enough problem that I've seen it many times where somebody who works in defense programming X, Y, or Z goes schizophrenic because they experience something very real that only a very small number of people experience. One of my most frustrating experiences I had in psychiatry, and this was before I even learned very much about just psychiatry in general, but one time I admitted myself to the hospital. I don't even remember why, but I admitted myself to the hospital, and the person who did my intake was assuming that I was grandiose and bipolar and stuff because of the fact that I was saying that the work that I do is very unique and very in a small sphere, right? And at the time, that was actually true. That not my professional work, but the work that people actually knew me for, which was making these silly little blind accessible games, was something that only a very few number of people were doing. And it's she thought I was crazy because I told her that. And I was pissed because I was I'm gonna go and put people on the phone. It was funny because I didn't even think about how at the time that made me sound. And that's the thing, people do not understand how that makes them sound to somebody who's in that position of, having the responsibility of doing your psychiatric intake, and they don't think like, I'm just pissed off at you, why are you not listening to me? And the person doing the intake is like, wow, this person's really having problems tonight.
Yes, and absolutely. And that, I think, illustrates quite well the dangers of just box ticking.
Mm-hmm. Oh, exactly.
And without because, like as I did, because this form of intaking would, for example, be antithetical with psychoanalytic intaking, where the aim is really to try and understand, to try and listen, and have a more holistic approach, rather than just saying, well, patient is talking about something special, that's automatically a grandiose delusion, when in fact it can be, as you pointed out, multiple sins, and that the uniqueness can be very true, especially because a lot of people with schizophrenia do sins that are quite unique at the before and even after the psychotic episodes.
Yeah. And like at the end of the day, everybody's experience is unique. And I'm gonna wrap up soon, but everybody's experience is unique with like psychosis, obviously, but it's I think like something that's just like really hard to talk about, like in general, is just like how recovering and finding your grounding again completely changes you. Because like I am a completely different person than I was before I went crazy, like a completely different person, right? And the only way I was able to even recover was just accepting, like, yeah, I'm not gonna be the same person. That was a big part of like why things got worse and worse, because like, a big part of the conflict I was experiencing in my head was just like, these things are happening to you and you just need to let go. And I'm like, no, I don't want to let go. I want to be, I'm a person. I'm a rational individual. I do not need the voice of a fucking dead guy in my head telling me what to do with my life, right? And I just didn't want to accept that, okay, things are rearranged differently now. And now that I have gone through that and I've come to accept the conditions of that and how it changed my life, now that I've taken time to slow down and understand it, I understand better that a lot of what was happening to me was not really necessarily something that, like, at the time it felt like I was being attacked by these, like, voices and stuff. But, like, I look back at it now and I realize something was happening to me, and it was almost like my brain was trying to tell me, like, something bad is happening to you and you need to listen to your brain so that it sucks less, basically. And it's like, now that I've had the time to sit down and actually understand these things, and it's really frustrating because I know that it doesn't matter if I tell my therapist this, they're just going to write it down and ignore it. They're not going to bring it up ever again. That was something that was really frustrating with my last therapist. Like, I would, have these episodes where I would dissociate, write these massive letters, and she'd never talk about them, and then I'd find them, like, a copy of it in my drawer 3 months later and be like, oh, that happened. Like, I don't understand how you can't, like, bring that up, Like, I don't know if that's, like, just what people are trained to do. It's so weird. I don't get it.
Yes, well, I can't talk about why you therapist.
Yeah, obviously, you don't know. You're probably just as confused.
Yes, well, yes, and especially because I'm so psychoanalytic orientated. If your therapist is from another school of thought, it might be completely different perspectives.
Yeah, that is true. Because like psychoanalysis is just, I don't think it's taken as seriously over here. Like when I was in the hospital the first time, they had a therapist show up and he was teaching us the differences between CBT and psychoanalysis. And he was just, like, trying to paint it like, oh, you have to keep going to psychoanalysis. And it's like, yeah, that's because it's a process. Like, it's not, like, a cure. It's not a, like, you go in and you go out and you're fixed. Like, I actually have more of a problem with a therapy that insists that I can receive, like, a treatment in, like, 6 to 12 sessions. That's a little... That feels like you're not listening, And it's kind of just crazy, like like I had to keep my mouth shut. Obviously, I didn't want to stay there any longer than I had to. But like, it was just like I'm not, and obviously, so psychoanalysis has its own limitations and stuff. But it's like I feel that like just the concept of just analyzing what somebody is saying should be kind of like the first step. And it's kind of weird, just like how everything is moving back, and it kind of goes back to what you were talking about, at the beginning, where you're talking about how there's all these cuts and all these like pushes towards like a liberal kind of in and out outpatient emphasis kind of thing, and it's just like deinstitutionalization, arguably, and
Yes.
it's just like it kind of comes down to, I think, like like again, like a de-existentialization of these problems, like people, if enough people believe that, like the problem with their depression is not like the situation that they're living in, which is really hard to fix and change, right? But rather, the fact that they need to have like, this therapy or that medication and stuff. And it's like, look, I'm glad for people who are successful on medication, but for people who are not, like me, who are treatment resistant, and people need to understand that treatment resistant doesn't mean like I'm just not taking them because I'm an asshole or I don't believe in that. No, they didn't work. Like my brain just found a way to work around them, and within like 6 months I would have problems again on the antipsychotics, and the antidepressants, they just made me feel numb. Like they didn't really help. So it's like, it's like it's fine for the people that it works for, but like there's such a gap, and it's like it feels almost like it's hard to even talk about. Like,
Yes. Yes, no, it's what you're pointing out is very true, and unfortunately, I think there is I'm in two minds about this. I think that it's important to try and find biological causes when there are some, but I do think that we are getting really lost in the West about this idea that mental disorder is a brain disorder. And I really do believe that it's more complicated than that, and that we are basically debasing mental health and mental issues by just reducing it to the brain, when indeed it's also about the phenomenology, the subjective experience. And I would even argue, but this is me being perhaps a little too controversial, but that in most mental illnesses, it's not the brain is dysfunctioning, it's that the brain is functioning as it is intended to, given the circumstances. That you're talking about being depressed in a world that's cruel, ruthless, and uncaring. But that's, in my eyes, that's not something that's inadapted or that it breaks with adaptation. It is just a reality. And I do believe that, how can I say, we have lost a lot by just thinking of these mental illnesses as just biological, basically dysfunctions.
yeah. It reminds me of one of the analogies that I used when I was psychotic to help me better understand what was happening to me. So, the old Pokemon games from like Red and Blue, right, 90s, they're super broken, right? Yeah, so they're super broken. You can do a ton of crazy glitches with them, and the way that they work, right? Huh?
Yes, I was just gonna say like missing.
Yeah,
no,
exactly,
and,
missing no. And essentially, how these errors work, right, is that the game functions as a predictable model most of the time, but the way that the player understands how this model works and how the machine actually works is slightly different, right? And if you understand that slight difference, it allows you in certain edge cases to essentially populate the RAM in the memory in ways that it's not intended to or expected to, right? And what happens is that if you keep doing this in certain ways and keep screwing around with these things, you can really corrupt memory really badly to the point where it starts impacting how the game actually functions and understands itself, right? So the way I thought about this was like, oh, like glitch Pokemon, you encounter them in the game and they do like weird stuff and you have to reset the game or whatever, right? But if you were the character experiencing that directly and encountering this creature, it'd be terrifying. It'd be like you'd be seeing demons. It would be like a horrifying negative schizophrenic experience. And that's when I realized, I'm like, that's what I'm experiencing. See, when that's happening on the Game Boy, right, the Game Boy's processor is working completely fine and normally most of the time, right? Like, you can get weird bugs from the CPU not working properly, but it has a very distinct appearance. It's very specific. It's kind of like how, like, if you have brain damage, it has a specific, you know, depending on where you get the brain damage. But with these kinds of bugs, right, they're actually very unpredictable, partly because the CPU actually functions predictably, but the code that's being referenced, right, that forms the structures of the game, right, is being overwritten, it's being changed. And that's very similar to what I experience, where it's like, my brain probably, you know, I might have brain damage, I don't know, I'm a little worried, but, like, theoretically, the problems that I experience are not mostly brain damage, probably, right? They are probably caused by the disorganization of these structures. That's why when I have these, like, when I have an emotional episode, right, 2 days later I have, like, essentially a psychotic episode that follows almost always, right, that lasts like a day. And that's because stuff that's happening in my brain is just not as differentiated as it was before, and that's just what I have to deal with. And it's just I guess where I'm going with this is that it's not necessarily the brain, and it's like, it's worrying, like you said, that people don't want to acknowledge this aspect of it. It's almost as if, like, I think, like, the best analogy in computing would be like, if there was a problem with a program, if we just looked at the computer itself instead of looking at the code, it's like, no, it's probably the code and probably the data that's the problem. And but that's really hard to quantify in science. That's really hard, psychology's methods of analyzing that scientifically are very limited. Like, I would argue that psychoanalysis is not, like, in of itself necessarily scientific in the same way that, like, debugging is not scientific. Debugging is not computer science in of itself. It is a form of analysis where you're taking things that you know are science and you know other things that are maybe not science but are, you know, structural observations and stuff, and are figuring out the problem and changing it. And it's more like engineering in a way. But yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And it's true that there is a lot of, how can I say, often debates, not very good faith debates on the scientificity of psychoanalysis. And I agree with you that, and I really do believe this, that it doesn't need to be repeated. Like, what works for one person doesn't need to work for another, in the sense that everyone's different. And psychoanalysis, I feel, needs to be reinvented from person to person. And in the examples you give of decoding, I found them to be wonderful, because it is a bit like that. It's you're looking out for things and you're trying to understand them as you're perceiving them. And sometimes you might be skeptical, horrified, or sometimes amused, but you're always exploring. And I think that that's in our world, which is going to be more and more reductive. It is important to still try and keep exploring subjectivity in all of its forms, shapes, and sizes.
My last question is, how much do you think that this kind of migration towards, like, you know, a scientific psychiatry, a purely scientific, as opposed to, like, a scientific, artistic, analytic psychiatry, is motivated by, like, it really seems motivated by, like, constructing a consumer relation with patients, which obviously I have a major problem with. But, like, it's kind of, like, similar to, like, what you would see I don't think it's like this in the European Union probably, but in the U.S. you could get bombarded with advertisements for like various drugs. It's crazy. It's very well known that there's a lot of trackers on the internet that are like paying attention to like what you type on social media and stuff. So if you talk about having like hallucinations or delusions, it will pick up on that, and you can actually get advertisements for schizophrenia meds, which I really need to stress to these advertisers: when you're a paranoid schizophrenic, it is not the message that you think you're hearing. You think that they're coming for you and they're trying to suppress you when you get those ads. It's scary as fuck. They don't understand.
It seems very counterproductive.
They don't get it. But I mean, they're advertisers, so. But yeah, like, how much of it do you think is like a consumer relation, like being constructed out of the patient? Like, I think it's like very obvious, but I want to hear your perspective on it.
Yes. Well, I think there's many things. I think there's first and foremost, at least how I see it, is almost a religious belief in science. And when I mean science, I mean like the most rigid biological, medical stuff. That your brain dysfunctions in this way. We have that medication that will magically heal you from this inconvenience. And there's a belief in, and it's very interesting, in neurology, that at some point we'll map out the brain and we will understand absolutely everything, and there'll be no need for psychologists, no need for therapists, no need for psychiatrists.
That sounds like Steven Pinker.
Yes, but I do think that there is like this almost delusional aspect to it, that somehow when we understand the brain we will be free of subjectivity, which for me is the greatest load of nonsense.
Well, yeah, just like how you wouldn't be free of like software bugs just if you understand how a computer works. I mean, we built computers the opposite way around. We came up with the idea of the computer first, then built them. We have plenty of fucking bugs. We're gonna have all sorts of subjectivity fun no matter how well we map out the brain.
Yes. Absolutely, and I do think that somehow when I mean the mental health community, have lost ourselves in this illusion. And I think that there is that aspect. There is a second aspect that is, I think, at least here in France, financial, that the government sees it as more cost-effective to have your 12 sessions of CBT plus antipsychotics, antidepressants, and so on
the
and so
efficiency
forth, than having
from the government.
Yes, than having this wacky psychoanalyst having to talk to you once or twice a week for the next 20 years, right? Even though it might be more effective, it's still seen by the government as something that, how can I say, is seen as ludicrous in this idea of cost effectiveness. And of course, and lastly, and this comes down to your point as well, there is this pharmaceutical industry that pushes the meds in a way that galvanizes their effectiveness, when in truth it's much more subtle than what they're promoting for everything, not just schizophrenia or psychosis, but also for depression. That, I mean, there's a lot of limitations to medication, and I believe that there will always be limitations.
Yeah, I agree. I think that like one of the most valuable things for me, just like with taking medications, is understanding like just a bit about how they work and a bit about the theory that guides them. Even like some medications, they don't even have that, just because they're just like, it seems to work and it passes all of the the tests and stuff. But there are others that we have more of a theoretical understanding of, like a mode of action and stuff, and that I think is very empowering, like for patients. Like there's just, I think, like regarding medication, like my biggest complaint is just that patients just in general are not informed enough about like medications. Like I think like the big one with antidepressants is that people are not reported about. For the longest time, people were not told very honestly about what to expect when getting off of most antidepressants, which involve the infamous brain zaps. And like people just weren't told about them. Like you imagine, it's crazy that like when you're trained. I mentioned this on my channel. Then I want to really wrap it up this. But like I mentioned this on my channel a few weeks ago, but it's crazy how many hoops they make you go through of like patient consent for like transgender hormones, right? But they will just put you on a drug that is extremely hard to get off of for depression. And we need to understand that like the people may want to get off of their meds for more than just, oh, big pharma, whatever. Like that's what people like to say, but like the real reason why people want to get off their meds may be like they can't afford them, right? That was something that happened to me. That was the reason why I had to get off of antidepressants. Like they weren't doing anything for me, but like it was covered by my insurance, so I didn't really care that much. But like then there was a point where I didn't have insurance anymore, and I was met with an $800 a month bill when I didn't have a job. What was I supposed to do? And it's like, you know, and like going through that withdrawal was horrible. It went on for over a month. It was awful, and they don't tell you any of that.
Yes, I see what you mean, because at least on the informational side, we have kind of the same problem in France, because there are fewer and fewer doctors. They take less and less time with their patients. Therefore, they're not gonna explain the withdrawal, how to stop medication. They will just like prescribe it and let you go on your way.
Yeah,
right?
and like and
that,
just think of how many inpatient stays are just caused by people who stop taking their medication for one reason or another. It doesn't even have to be that they're not being compliant. It can be that they lost their medication. It could be that they can't afford it.
Oh, absolutely. In France, that's why I think it's slightly less worse than in the
It's
USA.
so bad here.
But in France, yes, I'm sorry to say, it's really different, because at least for us, when there is a diagnosis or when a doctor prescribes, it's mainly paid back by Social Security. Like you might be paying out of pocket, but you'd only be paying like what, 10, maybe 20 euros tops, and that would be like for a month, right? So it's not...
Yeah, I did notice, this wasn't the medication, but I did notice on the Laborde website, which I don't think has been updated in a while, it said that after insurance, it's only like 15 euro a day. That's crazy. Do you know how much my 6 days cost?
Yes.
Are you ready for this? Before insurance.
No, but
Before
please.
insurance, it was over 10 grand.
Per day.
No, for 6 days. So
Oh my god.
yeah, it's not even a week, and it's 10 grand. And then afterwards, after insurance, it was like almost $1,000.
Oh god. So out of pocket, 1,000 euros.
Yeah.
Sorry, dollars.
Yeah, and then they wonder why, why it's such a disruption to people's lives. Not just, and then I had to deal with like the fact that I wasn't making money when that was going on, and I had to apply for short-term disability to just get like a little chunk of that money back, because it wasn't that I wasn't making money, it was that I had to use my PTO days as according to the company policy, so I couldn't take vacation that year, but at least I got paid. But then after those 5 days, I wasn't getting paid until I submitted my short-term disability, which meant that I was living on a very lean check for almost a month until I finally got that check. Ooh, that was really stressful. And it's great having to deal with that after only being medicated for a psychotic episode for 4 days. Oh my god, it's crazy that this is, and my experience is not even the worst experience that many people go through. I mean, like I said, the depressed people go through real hell sometimes, like where they're just stuck there for months. There was one woman that I met, one of my inpatient stays, who was probably put there by an abusive boyfriend, and apparently nobody got the frickin' message, and she was there for like 2 months. And she just kept refusing to take the medication, obviously. And so they just kept her there. And they kept her there, and they didn't listen to her that, like, no, my abusive boyfriend put me here. And she was completely stable. Like, she didn't show any signs of any illness. They just didn't listen to her.
Yes, and I think that what you're saying there really exemplifies, I think, really the threat that institutions can pose when they're not listening to people, and when they're not sink in, because that's, I think, also one of the main points of institutional psychotherapy, is to think about the
Yes,
institution,
it
to
makes
think about the inner
the
working.
institution conscious of itself in a way.
Yes, absolutely. And I do think that such a consciousness helps to deal with everything and at every level. Because what also I wanted to say, and I think it's important, is that in the institutional psychotherapy, there's this understanding that helping people, treating people, will have effects on the staff. And if the staff is not aware of them, of those effects, they can turn into adverse effects, that they can start mistreating patients. They will start to hurt them because they are burnt out,
They don't
fatigued,
see the value in their
or that they become.
actions. They, yeah.
Absolutely. And I think that therefore there is a whole, and this is where the name comes from, institutional psychotherapy, taking care of the institution itself, and not just seeing the staff as merely technicians that repair a car, but really seeing the whole process as a unified
Like an
entity.
ecosystem.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you so much, kid. It was great having you.
Well,
You're always awesome to have
thank you.
around. I think
Thank
people
you.
will really enjoy this. Thank you so much for your time. Like 2 hours. That's great.
You're welcome, and I was happy to talk with you. It was very nice as an experience.
Yes, it was great talking to you too. You take it easy.